A few years back, I picked up a gig as a night security guard at a storage facility on the outskirts of town. I needed the extra money to pay off some bills, so this job was the best one I could get at the time. The job seemed easy enough, mostly just walking around and making sure nobody broke into the units. But usually nights were pretty uneventful. There was rarely anything to do, and I often found myself scrolling through the internet to pass the time. However, during my second month on the job, something changed. Typically, only a few people walked through this area. It rarely attracted many visitors, especially at night. Most individuals were either at home or in the city center. However, it was the very first time I noticed this guy. He was probably in his late 30s, average height with dark hair and distinct facial lines, had this noticeable mole or mark on his cheek. He'd walk by the front gate around midnight, always wearing the same faded shirt and jeans. At first, I didn't think much of it. People walk by all the time. One night as he passed by, he glanced over and gave me a nod. I nodded back, just being polite. But then, he started showing up more frequently, almost every night. Sometimes he'd walk past, other times he'd just stand in the middle, and sometimes he'd linger near the gate, staring into the facility. It was a bit unsettling. Eventually, he approached the gate while I was on duty.
"Quiet night, huh?"
he said. I replied, "Yeah, pretty slow." He introduced himself as Dave. I told him my name was Mike. He repeated it quickly.
"Mike. Very nice name, Mike."
And gave a slight grin. Something about the way he said it gave me the creeps. After that, he'd stop by almost every night for a chat. He'd ask me random questions, like how long I'd been working there, or if I ever got bored. Sometimes he'd just stand there in silence, looking past me into the rows of storage units. I started to wonder if he was scoping the place out for a possible break-in. One night, he seemed more restless than usual. He kept shifting his weight and glancing around. I initiated to ask him if everything is all right.
"You ever feel like you're being watched, Mike?"
He asked me with a smirk look. I didn't know how to respond, so I just shrugged it off. I decided to be proactive. "So Dave, what brings you around here every night?" He chuckled and said,
"Just enjoying the night air. Can't a guy take a walk?"
But his eyes told a different story. There was something off about him, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. He left me quite early this night comparing to other ones. Maybe he had some plans, or perhaps I triggered him somehow. Anyway, I stopped seeing him so often. Actually, a week went by without any sign of Dave, and I started to relax a bit. Maybe he found somewhere else to hang out. But then, on a rainy night, when the facility was dead quiet, something happened that I will remember for a long time. As usual, I was standing near the entrance, looking for no one to break in, when suddenly I heard footsteps near the gate. I looked up and saw Dave, standing behind the bushes, drenched from the rain. He was staring straight at me, not saying a word. His eyes looked almost wild. "Dave, you're soaked. You all right?" I asked. He didn't respond immediately. After a few moments, he came to me, said in a low voice,
"I did something I shouldn't have, Mike."
A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean?" I asked cautiously. He stepped closer to the gate and said,
"I need a place to lay low for a while, Mike."
I shook my head. "Dave, I can't let you in here. This is private property." His expression hardened, and he muttered,
"I thought you might say that, Mike."
Without warning, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness, leaving me alone. I felt uneasy, not sure what to make of the whole encounter. Part of me wanted to call the police, but what would I tell them? That a guy who hangs around said something vague and walked off. A couple of hours later, as I was doing my routine patrol around the facility, I heard an unusual noise coming from one of the storage units. It sounded like muffled voices and faint thuds. Definitely not the typical creaks of the old building settling. I knew I was the only one on site, and no one was scheduled to access their units at this hour. I approached cautiously from the side. To my surprise, the doors were opened. My heart started pounding. I radioed in to report a possible break-in and requested immediate backup. Holding my breath, I slowly stepped inside, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The air inside was thick and musty, but what I saw there made my blood run cold. 2 women were inside, their wrists and ankles bound with duct tape, eyes wide with fear. They were gagged but trying desperately to speak. "It's okay, I'm here to help," I told them. But when I was about to walk to them, to remove their gags and bindings, I heard footsteps approaching from behind. Spinning around, I found myself face to face with Dave. His eyes widened in shock when he saw me with the women. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then, without warning, he turned and bolted out of the unit, disappearing into the night. I considered chasing after him, but decided against it. The safety of the women was my top priority. I guided them out of the unit and waited with them until the police arrived. They were shaken but unharmed, grateful to be rescued. When the officers questioned me, I described Dave in detail. One of them exchanged a knowing glance with his partner.
"That's David Miller,"
he said grimly.
"We've been tracking him for weeks. He's wanted for multiple kidnappings and assaults."
The realization hit me hard. Dave had been using our nightly chats to gather information about the facility, most likely to hide his victims. The thought made my skin crawl. I couldn't believe I'd been casually chatting with a wanted criminal, oblivious to the danger he posed. I decided to quit the job not long after. The nights at the storage facility were no longer peaceful. They were filled with shadows and echoes that stirred up my anxiety.